All right, thanks everyone. I work from home, so it's just a delight to see people in person, talk to them. So welcome to Streamlining Magento Development with Adobe Cloud Tools. Joe Shelton, Head of Development at Wagento, trainer for Adobe Digital Learning Services, formerly Magento U. And I'm also very active on Magento's community engineering Slack. So if you want to discuss anything about Magento, I'm available there. You can message me. Usually respond pretty quick to just about anyone. So today we're going to discuss two of the most critical tools for any Magento web developer. And those are a local development environment and a deployment tool for Magento. Magento is a very complex application. The deployment is a multi-stage thing, needs to be done in the right order. Sometimes you don't quite get it right. So, a tool to handle that as well is necessary for developers. Give you a little history on the tools we'll discuss here today. These tools were developed, these are first-party tools. They were developed by the Adobe Cloud Engineering department back when Magento was cell phone. So there were a bunch of Magento engineers that developed these first-party tools starting in around 2017. And these engineers, some of whom are here today, were always intended these tools to be very general purpose tools that would be known and used by every Magento developer. But Magento, it didn't quite publish them that way. It always associated them with the cloud edition of Magento. And I think today, many developers don't know that there are these two great first-party tools that can aid them with any edition of Magento. And both of these tools have GitHub accounts with all the you can raise issues there, you can contribute to the code. It's got all of the community engagement that Magento tools are known for. So we'll start by discussing Magento Cloud Docker. Once again, this is a tool that will work for any edition of Magento, including MageOS. Prerequisites for using this tool, it is a Docker implementation, so you're going to need to install Docker. You're also going to want to have PHP and Git installed, assuming your project is checked into version control, and also Composer, and then a Magento project, once again, of any edition. And one of the huge benefits of Docker is, here's what you don't need to know. You don't need to know how to install and configure Nginx. You don't need to know how to troubleshoot it. You don't need to know how to set its memory limits or its timeouts or anything like that. And on down the list of Magento's required services, these things are all delivered to you out of the box by this Docker implementation. And this allows you to stay specialized in whatever particular coding speciality you have. If you're a front-end developer, you can stay specialized in that. If you're a back-end developer, you can stay specialized in that. And you don't have to worry about kind of this DevOps territory. That allows our web development industry to kind of evolve. We're going to have to become more specialized as our industry evolves. And Docker is a tool that helps with that specialization. Installation, very, very easy. It is a Composer package, so you simply require the package using Composer, and that's it. After getting that installed via Composer, you are going to need to create one configuration file. It's the magento.docker.yaml file, and I've got kind of a default version of that file up on the slide here. First section is the mode. There is a developer and a production mode. This is different than the applications. Magento has a developer and production application mode. This Docker infrastructure also has kind of a distinction between the infrastructure you get when you're doing development versus production. Production is appropriate for running automated tests, things like Magento testing framework. But our purposes here today are developers. So mode is developer. And then after that, you're going to list the services that are required by your project. So for instance, version of PHP. And make sure when you're listing the versions of your services that you are matching what your project will have in its production environment. Docker provides you with a tool that does version control on your infrastructure. We're all used to version control being something we do with our code bases. It is just as necessary to do that with infrastructure. So just make sure you're double checking those versions and pairing them with your production environment of the project. And then one small note is that if you specify MySQL there kind of in the middle of the configuration, that's going to give you MariaDB. You could also specify that you wanted MySQL with a few extra lines of configuration, but this is the most default. I'm just demonstrating the most default configuration. Simplest way to get started. So after creating that configuration file, which is kind of in a format that's defined by Magento, we're gonna translate that file into a Docker configuration file, which is dockercompose.yaml. And if you've worked with Docker before, you've certainly worked with this file. But there is an automated tool that does this translation for you. It's a new CLI. It's located in the vendor bin directory, which is a composer convention, binary executable things are located there sometimes. So it's vendor bin ECE docker build compose. And then the build compose command has a lot of really, really powerful parameters that allow you to change the nature of the infrastructure you're going to get in your Docker environment. I'll highlight 4 of them that are the most general, and I use these on every project every time. Mode, again, is developer. Sync engine is kind of a complicated subject. So Docker can have, with certain operating systems and with certain architectures of microprocessor, Docker can experience some performance issues. So to alleviate these performance issues, a sync engine system was put in place where it's going to take your project code from your host machine, and it's going to copy that project code into the Docker environment. And then a sync process is going to, anytime there's changes in the Docker environment, it's going to copy those changes to the other code base and vice versa. I'm going to strongly recommend you don't use the sync because some systems are not going to have performance problems in the first place. And even if you have some performance problems and you get your development environment going a little faster, the sync breaks down. And when it breaks down, it's going to take you a half a day to troubleshoot that and figure out, well, what went wrong and how do I fix it? You're always going to spend more time troubleshooting the sync than you save. So that's sync engine equals native. That means no sync. It's kind of deceptive how they phrase it, but that means no sync is happening. With Xdebug, don't be afraid to install Xdebug. Some developers choose not to install Xdebug in their development environment either because it's super complex to do so, or because it will have some performance problems in your environment. It might slow it down a bit, but I'll demonstrate later why that's not an issue with this Docker implementation. And then lastly, you can just customize the host name that you're going to use on the project. That's just what you type in the browser to get the project, loaded up in a browser. If you're working on acme.com, then just, acme.test is a good host name. So let's take a look at what you get then Is that clear? Can you see the code file? So let's take a look at the docker.yaml file that you get. This is a very default file, kind of long, so I'll scroll up. First, so in this file is a list of the services that are going to be available in your environment. So first you've got the database, and what I'll point out here is the image, which is, there's a tooltip in the way, is MariaDB. What you've got here is you've got a MariaDB service with default functionality. And this is really another great advantage of Docker, is that this one file that we're looking at, it'll just very efficiently self-documents the environment. So if you know how DB behaves by default, you can take a look and you can see this is just a default MariaDB service. There may be some additional configuration underneath, but this is a huge advantage over a not Dockerized environment where you would have configuration files littered throughout the operating system, and you forget where they are, and you forget what configuration is effective. This one file just describes your whole environment, which is a huge advantage. Scrolling down a little bit, we've got Redis. That's just using a Redis service with default functionality. Few modifications here. Don't have time to get into depth on what all those modifications mean, but just to point out to you that this file will identify for you any modifications to configuration. OpenSearch, taking a look at the image here, what we can see is that image is in Magento's namespace, just because it's preceded here by Magento. That means the Adobe engineers have somehow customized the default OpenSearch. We can presume that they've made it more compatible somehow with Magento. They've done something good, something to advantage us. And if you want to see exactly what they've done, that's available in the package that Composer downloaded. So you can look in the vendor directory and you can see precisely what customizations they've made. FPM service, that's your main PHP container. You can see we're getting PHP 8.2 in this case. Web service, that's Nginx. Varnish, this comes pre-installed with Varnish, works right out of the box. Should a development environment have Varnish and have heavy caching? It turns out the answer is yes, because if your production environment has Varnish cache, you need to code and test in your development environment against Varnish cache. Otherwise, there's a huge chance that your code will not be compatible with Varnish once it gets to production. Next, you've got a TLS container, which is a security certificate. Again, we want a security certificate installed on our local development environments because the behavior of browsers is very different, whether or not you're using the HTTP protocol or HTTPS. Since your production environment is certainly going to use a security certificate, you want your development environment to use that as well. And then down here, we've got another FPM container, this one with Xdebug installed. So we've got one PHP container, basically, that does not have Xdebug, and we've got one PHP container that does have Xdebug installed. And any requests you make where you want Xdebug enabled will go to the Xdebug container and take a little longer, but you'll get all that rich troubleshooting information. Any requests that you make where you don't have Xdebug enabled will go to the normal PHP container. And that's why you can have Xdebug installed but not suffer any performance problems. It's a pretty genius architecture. And then there's a few other containers. They're not Magento specific, they're just kind of housekeeping things. So I won't get into those. So the good news about this default configuration is that it will run 90% of the projects that we work on at our agency, Wagento. It's quite robust. There's really not a need for much customization. We haven't found any need except for on the 10% of projects that are just crazy. But if you do need to customize, I can point out a few places where it's appropriate to do that. You're going to want to focus mainly on the docker compose.override.yaml file. You don't want to touch the main Docker Compose file because that file is going to be overwritten anytime you rebuild your configuration or anytime the Adobe team makes some changes to this tool. Potentially, you're going to zap out your changes from docker compose.yaml. So treat that as Magento's name, and you should utilize override.yaml. You can put anything there and it'll stay safe. One more place to point out is when you install the tool, it installs a .docker directory. A few things to point out here. You can customize database configuration there. If you have one of those projects with 1 million products or 1 million orders or something like that, probably you would need some database configuration customization, so that can go there. And then also at the bottom of this directory is a trio of config files. There's a lot of odds and ends there. There's things like the host names and the port names of your services. Very rare that you would want to customize that, but I just direct your attention to it in case you want to just kind of see the guts of this Docker implementation. A lot of it is there. Again, in both these cases, don't modify any of the files that are installed by default, like that example.cnf. Consider those to be Magento namespace and core Magento files. You don't want to edit those. Instead, create your own files, and they'll be automatically included in the environment. So what we've done so far is we've written configuration files for the infrastructure you'll get in your local environment. So we've kind of written the recipe, but now we're going to start cooking. So there's another CLI that we're being introduced to. It's bin Magento Docker, and that's going to be right next to bin Magento in that familiar place. And the bin Magento Docker up command will bring up your environment, make it alive for the first time. And then to log into that environment, you want to use the bin Magento Docker bash command. If you are new to Docker, you're going to spend a lot of the learning curve associated with that technology. Trying to figure out kind of like two different environments. A Docker environment is something that is becomes totally separate from your host machine or what we just call your computer. It's on a separate network. It uses a separate file system. So understanding where to use your favorite development tools, which of those two environments is appropriate, and how are those two environments connected such that they can talk to each other. It takes a lot of learning and a lot of experience to kind of figure that out. But in general, what you want to do is you want to have on your host machine your project code base checked out of Git. You want all your really, really nice, really robust development tools to be installed there. So like PHP Storm, VS Code, things like that. Developers should also use like a really nice database tool, like I use dbeaver. You can see the little beaver mascot there. If you haven't taken the time to look in and learn a really nice database tool, I highly recommend that. And then the two CLIs that we've introduced here today, vendor bin, ECE Docker, and bin Magento Docker, those are intended to be run from the host machine. And then over on your Docker environment, you've got all your kind of Linux native tools like Redis and Nginx, and you've got MailHog installed there for troubleshooting email. Mage Run, those kind of crunchy command line development tools Those would be appropriate in the Docker environment. And the bin Magento CLI itself, that should be run from the Docker environment. It will probably fail if you try to run it from the host machine. Okay, so that was kind of your initial setup. You'll have to do all of that once, but then, day-to-day dealing with this environment. If you come into work the next day, how do you shut down the environment? How do you bring it back up? There's a couple different tools. There's up and down and start and stop. It doesn't make a huge difference which of these commands you use. Your data will persist in both cases. They're both safe to use. If you want to change configuration, like change a version of PHP or something like that, you will have to reload the configuration, which requires downing the environment and then back up. And if you've gotten to a place where you are just so frustrated with the environment and something's broken and you don't know if you should take 2 steps forward or 2 steps back, there is a command, bin Magento docker init, that will just take down your environment, delete everything, and you can just start over. It won't delete your code, but it'll delete everything associated with the infrastructure, just in case something has gone wrong. You can start from the beginning. And then flush Redis and flush varnish. This is, you might have gotten into the situation as a Magento developer where Magento is broken, and the solution to fixing Magento is clearing the cache. Only bin Magento cache clear won't fix the cache because Magento is broken. It's not running for some reason. So if you get into this catch-22 situation, you can exit the Docker environment, and those 2 commands will clear your caches in a very fail-safe way. And then lastly, there's just a convenience method that will log you into the database within your Docker environment without having to look up any passwords or usernames or anything like that. I'll just get you right in there. Okay, so that's the end of the Magento Cloud Docker. Moving on to what the Adobe engineers called ECE tools. This is the deployment script. ECE tools is a very reliable deployment script. We've been using it for years, and it is, I do find it to be somewhat more reliable than other deployment scripts that are available in the community. No matter how much change we have thrown at this tool, it always deploys successfully. If you have 3 modules to install and a new theme, and you send that all in one deployment, it's going to handle it somewhat more reliably than other deployment tools I've used. This tool is specific to the Adobe Commerce Cloud infrastructure, but it is also very easily extensible. You can just like if you're familiar with Layout XML, very similar system. You can modify any of the steps. You can replace the steps with your own PHP classes that you've custom coded. Like all good Magento tools, it's just very easy to change. So I've started a community project where I hope to adapt this tool, which is now Adobe Cloud Commerce specific, into something that can be used on any edition of Magento. So you could use this for deployments on your local system, on any remote infrastructure. Going to make it nice and general purpose. Different kinds of deployments that you expect, blue-green deployments, multi-node deployments, in-place deployments, what I call stateless deployments. So I've created a project in Wagento's GitHub. There's nothing functional there yet, but if you're excited about a deployment tool that's this useful, you can kind of like and subscribe that repository, and if you want to contribute to that repository, that would be great. Okay, thank you. Got time for questions, if there's any questions. Ooh, not much time, though. Sorry.
Do you have any questions for Joey about his presentation? Yeah, sure.
So will that tool, so I'm forced to work in a Windows environment and IT only lets me put Sigwin on my laptop.
Okay.
Can I make that work with Sigwin, do you know? Or will it?
I'm not familiar with that tool. I mean, what will they let you put on it? Will they let you put...
I can put Docker on it.
You can do Docker
like
desktop?
I have Mark Schuss Docker.
Yeah.
I assume it's close to the same thing, but not.
It would be the same. If you can get any other Docker implementation running, I would bet that this would run as well.
Because Marx uses Bash to start things up, and this is using PHP.
It is. So you don't have PHP installed on your local machine?
Not by default.
Do you have...
I'd have to run Winamp, which is awful.
Okay, right. I'm blanking now. What is that tool that emulates a Linux environment on Windows? WSL. Can you install that?
I'm fighting for it, but no.
What? I didn't hear.
I cannot. I'm not allowed to.
I don't know what your solution is. I'll tell you this, that when I'm teaching classes for Adobe, a lot of students come into my classes and they, I'm taking up too much time. Let me talk to you after the speech. I don't want to delay anybody else's speech. But yeah, that's a problem that I've seen at many workplaces that I don't have a technology solution, but I'll talk to you about it.
Okay, do we have any other specific questions? I think that if anyone can, still has some question, please feel free to, to catch up with Joey straight away after the presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Joey.